My name is Hazel Morrison, and am 31 years old. The moment my sister Giselle called me pathetic and broke in front of her CEO boyfriend at Christmas dinner, I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. My hands shook as I gripped my wine glass, watching her throw her head back and laugh while our mother nodded along approvingly. Maxwell Stone, the man Giselle had been dating for 6 months and couldn't stop bragging about, sat at the head of his own dining table with an expression I couldn't quite read. What my sister didn't know was that Maxwell had already asked me about my business plan 3 days earlier. Before we dive into how that Christmas dinner became the most satisfying moment of my life, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. If you've ever had a family member who made you feel small, hit that like button because you're going to want to see how this story ends. And subscribe because, trust me, the karma in this tale is absolutely delicious. Now let me take you back to where this whole mess started, because you need to understand just how twisted my relationship with my sister had always been. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, Giselle and I were never really sisters in the way people imagine. We were competitors in a game I didn't even know I was playing until it was too late to win. Our mother, Diane, had decided somewhere around Giselle's 3rd birthday that she was the special one, the beautiful daughter who would marry well and live a glamorous life. I was the other one, the smart but plain girl who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention came my way. My father Arthur saw it happening but never said a word, choosing peace over protecting me, and that silence hurt almost as much as the favoritism itself. When I was 12 years old, I spent 3 months building a science fair project about renewable energy. I was so proud of that solar-powered model house with its tiny LED lights and rotating panels. The night before the fair, Giselle snuck into the garage and smashed it to pieces, then told our parents I must have been careless and knocked it over myself. Mom believed her instantly, didn't even question it, just sighed and said I needed to be more responsible. When I was 17, I finally got asked to prom by a boy I'd been crushing on for 2 years. Giselle, who was 14 at the time, spread rumors that I'd been talking badly about him behind his back. He took her best friend to prom instead, and I stayed home crying while Mom told me I should have been nicer to people. The worst betrayal came when I was 18 and had been accepted to a good university 3 hours away. I'd worked so hard, gotten a partial scholarship, just needed help with the rest. Giselle convinced our parents that I was trying to abandon the family, that I thought I was too good for community college like everyone else. They refused to contribute a single dollar to my education, so I did it myself, the way I'd learned to do everything. I worked full-time at a coffee shop while attending community college, then transferred to a state university for my final 2 years. I graduated with a degree in graphic design and marketing, carrying student loan debt, but also carrying pride that I'd earned every single credit hour myself. For 6 years after graduation, I worked at a corporate marketing firm, designing, packaging, and promotional materials for clients I never met. I saved every penny I could, living in a tiny studio apartment and cooking all my meals at home, because I had a dream that felt bigger than the cubicle walls closing in around me. 8 months ago, I finally took the leap and started my own sustainable packaging design company, focusing on eco-friendly materials and innovative solutions for businesses trying to reduce their environmental impact. The business was struggling in the way all new ventures struggle. It landed a few small clients, but the big contracts kept slipping through my fingers. I was burning through my savings faster than I'd hoped, lying awake at 3 in the morning wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. If my mother had been right all along that I should just accept a normal, safe, boring life. Meanwhile, Giselle had bounced from job to job for years, working retail at the mall, then hostessing at restaurants, then selling makeup at department store counters. She never kept a position for more than 8 or 9 months before either quitting dramatically or getting fired for attendance issues. But she had a talent that I'd never possessed. A gift for finding wealthy men who would take care of her, at least temporarily. 6 months before that fateful Christmas dinner, Giselle started dating Maxwell Stone. He was 38 years old, devastatingly handsome in that polished executive way, and the CEO of TechVance Solutions, a mid-sized tech company that had been making waves with innovative software products. Giselle met him when he came into the department store where she worked, and somehow, she managed to charm him into asking for her number. Within a week, her social media exploded with photos of expensive restaurants, designer shopping bags, weekend trips to wine country, and endless selfies in Maxwell's luxury cars. She became absolutely unbearable, calling me just to brag about the latest gift Head bought her, posting Instagram stories from his downtown Seattle penthouse, making sure everyone knew Shed finally landed the big fish Shed always been hunting for. Our first real confrontation about Maxwell happened at Thanksgiving, just 1 month before Christmas. My parents had hosted dinner at their house in the suburbs, and Giselle brought Maxwell for the first time to meet the family. I'd been nervous about seeing her, about having to smile and nod while she showed off her perfect life, but I thought I could get through one meal without incident. I was wrong. During dinner, my father asked me how my business was going, a genuine question from the one parent who occasionally seemed to care. I'd been honest, admitting that I was having a tough month, that a client I'd been counting on had gone with a larger firm instead. Before I could even finish explaining that this was normal for startups, Giselle burst out laughing, this loud, performative cackle that made everyone at the table stop and stare. She said, loud enough for Maxwell and everyone else to hear clearly, maybe I should just get a real job instead of playing entrepreneur and wasting everyone's time with my little hobby business. Maxwell had looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat and staring down at his plate, but he said nothing to contradict her or defend me. My mother had immediately jumped in to support Giselle, patting her hand and saying she had a point, that maybe it was time for me to be realistic about my limitations. I'd sat there, feeling my face burn with humiliation, blinking back tears, trying to maintain some shred of dignity. I'd left early that night, claiming I wasn't feeling well, and spent the drive home crying so hard I had to pull over twice because I couldn't see the road. That Thanksgiving dinner had felt like the lowest point, like confirmation that my family would always see me as the failure, the disappointment, the sister who couldn't measure up. I had no idea that in just 4 weeks, everything would flip completely upside down. 3 days before Christmas, I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop on a rainy Wednesday afternoon, trying to work on a proposal for a potential client while secretly spiraling into anxiety about my dwindling bank account. My laptop was surrounded by scattered notes, empty coffee cups, and the desperate energy of someone trying to manifest success through sheer willpower. I was so focused on the screen that I didn't notice someone approaching my table until a familiar voice said my name. I looked up and there was Maxwell Stone, holding a coffee cup and wearing jeans and a sweater instead of his usual business attire. Looking almost approachable instead of like the untouchable CEO my sister constantly gushed about. My first instinct was panic, wondering if Giselle had sent him to spy on me or gather more ammunition for her next public humiliation. I started to close my laptop, mumbling something about needing to leave, but Maxwell held up his hand and apologized quickly. He said Giselle had gone shopping with friends, and Head needed some space, some time alone to think, and Head wandered into this coffee shop randomly. Then he did something I never expected. He apologized for Thanksgiving, for sitting there while Giselle tore me down, for not saying anything to stop it. He said it had bothered him for weeks, that Head wanted to reach out but hadn't known how without making things worse between Giselle and me. I was defensive at first, my walls up high, assuming this was some kind of elaborate setup, but Maxwell kept talking, and something in his tone seemed genuine, almost vulnerable. He told me that he had a habit from his business background of researching every business model he encountered, that he couldn't help analyzing opportunities even in casual conversations. He asked, with what seemed like real curiosity, about my sustainable packaging company. I'd spent so many months having doors slammed in my face, having people dismiss my ideas as too niche or too expensive or too idealistic, that I'd almost forgotten what it felt like to have someone actually listen. So I opened my laptop and showed him my portfolio, the designs I'd created, the prototypes I'd built, the market research I'd compiled about the growing demand for eco-friendly packaging solutions. Maxwell's entire demeanor changed as he looked through my work. His eyes lit up with the kind of excitement I recognized from my own face when I talked about design concepts. He started asking specific, intelligent questions about materials sourcing, production costs, scalability potential, durability testing. He leaned in closer to see the details of a particularly innovative design I'd created for a food company, a compostable container that could withstand both hot and cold temperatures. Then he said something that made my heart stop. He told me that TechVance was actually in the market for a complete packaging rebrand, that they wanted to shift all their product packaging to be more environmentally sustainable, that his marketing team had been struggling to find designers who understood both aesthetics and ecological impact. He asked if I would be willing to send him a formal proposal after the holidays, and he handed me his business card with his personal email address written on the back. I sat there, staring at that card, completely confused about what was happening. This was my sister's boyfriend, the man she'd been parading around like a trophy for 6 months, and he was offering me a potential business opportunity that could change everything. I asked him directly if this was some kind of joke, if Giselle had put him up to this to humiliate me later. Maxwell's face got serious, and he promised me it wasn't, that this was purely professional, that my work was legitimately impressive. Then he said something that sent warning bells ringing in my head. He mentioned that Giselle didn't really understand what he did for a living, that she liked the lifestyle his money provided but had no interest in his actual work, that conversations about business made her eyes glaze over with boredom. We ended up talking for 90 minutes, the conversation flowing easily once I let myself relax. Maxwell told me about the challenges of running a tech company in an increasingly competitive market, about his vision for making TechVance a leader in corporate environmental responsibility. I told him about my years working in corporate design, about the moment I realized I wanted to create something meaningful instead of just collecting a paycheck. We talked about design philosophy and sustainability metrics and the psychology of consumer packaging choices. It was the first real conversation I'd had about my business with someone who actually understood what I was trying to build, and I felt something shift inside me, a tiny spark of hope that maybe I wasn't crazy, maybe my ideas had real value. But that hope came with anxiety. Maxwell kept checking his phone, his expression tightening each time he looked at the screen. I caught glimpses of the messages flashing across his notifications, all from Giselle, demanding to know where he was, why he wasn't answering, when he was coming back. The texts got progressively more aggressive, more controlling, and I watched Maxwell's jaw clench as he read them. Finally, he sighed heavily and said he should probably go before the situation escalated further. He asked me not to mention our conversation to Giselle, explaining that she got jealous easily and might cause problems for me if she knew we'd talked about business. I agreed, understanding the implication that my sister's possessiveness extended beyond reason. As he left, I sat there with his business card in my hand, wondering if I'd just imagined the whole surreal encounter. 2 days before Christmas, my phone rang with Giselle's number, and I almost didn't answer. Our interactions had become so toxic that I'd started avoiding her calls, letting them go to voicemail, and then deleting the messages without listening. But something made me pick up that day. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the stubborn hope that she might actually be reaching out with kindness for once. Her voice on the other end was unusually cheerful, syrupy sweet in a way that immediately put me on guard. She insisted that I absolutely had to come to Christmas dinner at Maxwell's penthouse, that it would be intimate and special, just close family, that Maxwell wanted to meet everyone properly, in a more relaxed setting than Thanksgiving had been. She rattled off the guest list like she was planning a royal event. Our parents would be there, of course, and Maxwell's business partner Vincent would be coming with his wife. She made it sound like an honor, like I should be grateful for the invitation, like she was doing me some huge favor by including me in her glamorous life. I was immediately hesitant, my stomach knotting with dread as I remembered the Thanksgiving disaster. I tried to make excuses about having other plans, about needing to work, about not wanting to intrude on her special evening with Maxwell. Giselle's voice turned cold instantly, dropping the fake sweetness like a mask. She told me not to be difficult, that Mom had already confirmed I was coming, that refusing would embarrass the whole family. 30 minutes after I hung up with Giselle, my mother called. She didn't ask if I wanted to come or if I was comfortable attending, she simply informed me that I was expected to be there. She reminded me not to embarrass them by refusing the invitation, that Giselle was dating a very important man and we all needed to make a good impression. Then she added, in that tone Shed perfected over decades of subtle cruelty, that maybe I could learn something from my sister about what real success looked like. I felt trapped, backed into a corner by family obligation and the lifetime habit of trying to please people who would never be pleased. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay away, I agreed to come. The next day, I was scrolling through Instagram mindlessly when I saw a story Giselle had posted. It was a screenshot of a text conversation between her and her friend Bianca, and Giselle had apparently forgotten that her stories were public instead of private. The message made my blood run cold. Shed written to Bianca that she couldn't wait for Christmas dinner, that she was planning to put me in my place in front of Maxwell's important guests, that I needed to see what a real successful woman looked like. She added laughing emojis and said it was going to be the best Christmas present she could give herself, watching me squirm with humiliation while everyone saw how pathetic my life was compared to hers. I sat there staring at that screenshot, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. Shed literally invited me to dinner for the sole purpose of publicly destroying me, and she was so confident in her plan that she had been careless enough to share it online. I thought about canceling, about calling Maxwell to tell him what Shed written, about confronting her directly. But something in me hardened, some core of stubbornness that had survived years of being treated like I was worthless. I decided I would go to that dinner and I wouldn't give Giselle the satisfaction of knowing I was scared. I would walk in there with my head high and take whatever she threw at me, because I was done letting her make me feel small. The day before Christmas, Giselle called again with last-minute details. She mentioned casually, like it was an afterthought, that the dress code was cocktail attire, expensive and formal. Something in her tone felt off, too eager, too pleased with herself. After we hung up, I called the main number for TechVance and asked to speak with Maxwell's executive assistant, claiming I needed to confirm the time for the dinner party. The assistant was friendly and helpful, checking the details for me. She mentioned that Maxwell had specifically said there was no formal dress code, just to dress festively and be comfortable. Giselle had lied, trying to trick me into showing up overdressed and uncomfortable, setting me up to look ridiculous from the moment I walked in the door. I thanked the assistant and hung up, adding this to the growing list of my sister's sabotage attempts. At least this time, I was prepared. Maxwell's penthouse was everything Giselle's Instagram posts had promised and more. The building was a sleek high-rise in downtown Seattle with a doorman who checked my name against a list before allowing me into the elevator. The ride up to the 32nd floor gave me time to practice my breathing, to remind myself that I could survive a few hours, that soon this would all be over. When the elevator doors opened directly into Maxwell's apartment, I stepped into a space that looked like something from an architecture magazine. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights twinkling in the winter darkness. The furniture was modern and expensive without being cold, and a Christmas tree at least 12 feet tall dominated one corner, decorated with white lights and elegant silver ornaments. Giselle answered the door wearing a designer gown that must have cost thousands of dollars, something far too formal for an intimate family dinner. Her face flickered with disappointment when she saw my burgundy dress, elegant but simple, perfectly appropriate for the actual dress code. She looked me up and down with a sneer and said, in that sugary tone that meant the opposite of every word, that Shed thought I would dress up more for such a special occasion. I smiled blandly and stepped past her into the apartment, refusing to take the bait. Maxwell was in the kitchen area talking with the chef head hired to prepare dinner, and he looked up when I entered. He greeted me warmly, professional but genuinely kind, saying it was good to see me again. Giselle's eyes narrowed dangerously at those words. She turned to Maxwell with false brightness and asked what he meant by again. Maxwell explained easily that we'd run into each other at a coffee shop a few days earlier. asked if Head mentioned it to her. The way he said it made it clear he had mentioned it. That Giselle simply hadn't been listening because she never listened when Maxwell talked about anything other than what he could buy for her. I watched her face as she processed this, saw the flash of suspicion quickly covered by her practiced smile. It was the first crack in her confidence, the first sign that the evening might not go exactly as Shed planned. My parents arrived within minutes, my father Arthur looking uncomfortable in a suit that didn't quite fit anymore. My mother Diane dressed to impress in her best jewelry and a dress Shed probably bought specifically for this occasion. Mom made a huge production of greeting Giselle, hugging her and complimenting her gown, telling her how beautiful she looked, how proud she must be of her wonderful life. She barely glanced at me, offering only a brief nod before turning her attention back to Giselle and Maxwell. My father caught my eye and gave me a small, sympathetic smile, the most support Head ever managed to show me. Still not brave enough to actually speak up or defend me, but at least acknowledging silently that he saw the unfairness. Maxwell's business partner Vincent arrived with his wife Margot shortly after my parents. Vincent was in his early 40s, sharp-eyed and quietly observant, and Margot was a lawyer with a warm smile and intelligent eyes. They greeted everyone politely, and I noticed Margot studying the family dynamics with the analytical gaze of someone who made a living reading people. The chef began serving appetizers and champagne, and everyone migrated to the living room area. Giselle positioned herself at the center of attention, steering the conversation toward her recent accomplishments and the lavish lifestyle Maxwell provided. She described in excruciating detail a shopping trip to Paris that Maxwell had paid for, showing off a new Cartier bracelet that caught the light as she gestured dramatically. My mother oohed and awed over every detail, asking questions that allowed Giselle to brag even more. Margot looked distinctly uncomfortable with the materialism on display, exchanging glances with Vincent that suggested they'd already formed opinions about my sister's character. Maxwell stood slightly apart from Giselle, his posture stiff, and I noticed Head barely touched his champagne. There was tension between them that I hadn't seen before, a distance in the way he watched her perform for our parents. Then Giselle launched her first attack of the evening, turning to me with false concern dripping from every word. She said loudly enough for everyone to hear that Shed been so worried about me, that Shed heard my little business had gotten rejected by another client just last week. The room went quiet. I hadn't told anyone about losing that potential client, hadn't posted about it anywhere, hadn't mentioned it in any conversation. The only way Giselle could have known was if Shed somehow accessed my email. I realized with a sickening lurch that she must have hacked into my account at some point, probably months ago, and had been reading my private correspondence looking for ammunition. My mother immediately jumped in with concern that sounded more like judgment, asking if maybe it was time for me to consider going back to a stable corporate job before I ran out of money entirely. My face burned with humiliation as everyone stared at me, waiting for my response. I noticed Maxwell's jaw tighten and Vincent's expression shift to disapproval, but neither of them said anything. I was on my own, exactly where Giselle wanted me. The chef announced that dinner was ready, and we moved to the formal dining table that could easily seat 12 people. The table was set with beautiful china and crystal glasses, with candles and winter flower arrangements creating an atmosphere of elegant celebration. Giselle made sure to seat herself right next to Maxwell at the head of the table, positioning him like a throne Shed earned the right to sit beside. I ended up between my father and Margot, as far from Giselle as the seating arrangement allowed. The first course was served, some kind of elegant soup with garnishes I couldn't identify, and wine began flowing freely. Giselle drank more than she ate, her cheeks flushing, and her voice getting louder with each glass. During the appetizer course, Giselle steered the conversation toward career success and business acumen. She turned to Vincent with exaggerated curiosity and asked him what he thought made a business truly successful in today's competitive market. Vincent, unaware he was being set up as a weapon, gave a thoughtful answer about innovation, persistence, building strong teams, and adapting to changing consumer needs. Giselle nodded along like she was absorbing profound wisdom. then asked with false innocence what he thought about businesses that failed within their first year. She shot a pointed look directly at me and continued, saying that some people just weren't cut out to be entrepreneurs, that maybe they should recognize their limitations before wasting more time and money on unrealistic dreams. The attack was just beginning, and Giselle was warming to her theme. She started telling stories about my supposed failures, mixing truth with exaggeration and outright lies. She claimed I'd begged her for money multiple times to keep my business afloat, which had never happened. She described my apartment as barely livable, a sad little place that showed how far I'd fallen, when in reality, I had a perfectly nice, modest apartment that I kept clean and comfortable. She painted a picture of me as desperate, pathetic, clinging to a failing dream because I was too proud or too stupid to admit defeat. My mother nodded along to everything Giselle said, adding her own comments about how she and my father had always worried about my choices, how I'd never been quite as practical or level-headed as Giselle. I tried to defend myself with quiet dignity, saying that my business was still finding its footing like all startups do, that the first year is always the hardest. Giselle laughed loudly at that, a cruel sound that echoed off the high ceilings. She repeated my words mockingly, saying finding its footing was a nice way of saying failing spectacularly. She looked around the table seeking validation, her eyes landing on Maxwell expectantly. But Maxwell wasn't laughing. His face had gone dark and stormy, his knuckles white where he gripped his wine glass. Vincent and Margot were exchanging shocked looks, and I heard Vincent whisper to Maxwell asking if Giselle was always like this. The question hung in the air, and Maxwell's expression was answer enough. The main course arrived, beautifully plated portions of roasted meat and seasonal vegetables, but I could barely taste anything. My appetite had vanished, replaced by a knot of anxiety and humiliation sitting heavy in my stomach. Giselle wasn't done yet, though. She stood up dramatically, her chair scraping against the floor, and announced that she wanted to make a toast. Everyone fell silent as she lifted her wine glass, swaying slightly from the alcohol she had consumed. She toasted to her amazing boyfriend Maxwell, to the wonderful life they were building together, and then she turned her attention to me. She said, with venom barely concealed beneath a layer of false sympathy, that she also wanted to toast to her sister Hazel, who tried so hard at everything but just couldn't seem to succeed at anything, no matter how much effort she put in. She suggested that maybe watching how a real power couple operated would teach me something valuable about success and ambition. My mother actually clinked her glass in approval, smiling at Giselle like she'd said something wise and helpful. I felt tears threatening, my vision blurring as I tried to maintain composure. I was about to excuse myself, to retreat to the bathroom where I could fall apart in private, when Maxwell stood up abruptly. The movement was so sudden and forceful that everyone froze. He pushed his chair back and stood at his full height, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. The expression on his face was nothing like the polite, slightly uncomfortable man who'd sat through Giselle's performance. This was the CEO, the man who'd built a multi-million-dollar company, and he looked absolutely furious. Maxwell's voice when he spoke was cold and controlled, the kind of authoritative tone that makes people instinctively straighten up and pay attention. He said he'd like to make a toast too, if everyone would indulge him. Giselle was still standing, her glass raised, beaming because she thought he was about to join in her mockery of me, about to prove that he was on her side. She had no idea what was coming. Maxwell lifted his own glass and said he wanted to toast to Hazel Morrison, whose innovative, sustainable packaging designs were exactly what TechVance Solutions needed to achieve their environmental sustainability goals. The words landed like a bomb in the middle of the dinner table. Giselle's smile froze on her face. My mother's mouth dropped open. Vincent leaned back in his chair with an expression of sudden understanding. Maxwell wasn't done. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a folded document, setting it on the table in front of him. He said he'd reviewed my proposal that very afternoon, that he'd spent 3 hours going over the designs and cost projections with his senior team, and that the work was exceptional. He told the entire table that he wanted to offer me a 3-year exclusive contract with TechVance Solutions, with a starting value of $750,000. The room went completely silent, except for the soft background music the chef had playing in the kitchen area. $750,000. The number hung in the air, impossible to ignore or dismiss. I sat frozen in my chair, unable to process what was happening, wondering if I was hallucinating from stress. Giselle found her voice first, sputtering questions that tumbled over each other. What proposal? When did I meet with him? Why didn't she know about this? Maxwell turned to her with an expression devoid of warmth and explained that he and I had met earlier in the week to discuss business, that Id presented a comprehensive plan that solved problems his engineering team had been wrestling with for months. He emphasized the word business, making it clear this was professional, not personal. Giselle's face had gone from flushed to pale, her carefully applied makeup suddenly garish against her bloodless skin. She accused him of meeting with me behind her back, her voice rising toward hysteria. Maxwell corrected her calmly, saying it was a business meeting, professional and above board, something she wouldn't understand since she'd been lying about virtually every aspect of her own professional life. That's when he dropped the second bomb. He revealed that Giselle had told him she was a senior marketing director at a prestigious firm, when in reality she was an entry-level sales associate at a department store. She'd claimed to have a master's degree in business administration, but she'd never completed her undergraduate degree. She'd said she spoke 3 languages fluently, when she could barely remember high school Spanish. Vincent's eyes widened with recognition, and he leaned forward to say something to Maxwell, who nodded grimly. Maxwell then revealed something that made my jaw drop. Giselle actually worked at Tech Vance, in their retail division at one of their company stores. She'd applied for a corporate position last month using falsified credentials, creating fake transcripts and reference letters. The Human Resources Department had flagged the application that very morning as part of a routine background check, and they'd been preparing to terminate her employment when Maxwell had stepped in to handle it personally since she was someone he was dating. The phrase was dating didn't escape anyone's notice, least of all Giselle, whose face now cycled through expressions of shock, denial, and dawning horror. Maxwell pulled a second document from his jacket pocket. This one in an official-looking envelope with the Tech Vance logo. He slid it across the table toward Giselle and informed her it was her termination letter, effective immediately, for credential fraud and workplace harassment. The words workplace harassment seemed to hit Giselle like a physical blow. She tried to deny it, shaking her head frantically, but Maxwell kept talking in that same cold, controlled voice. He explained that over the past 3 months, multiple employees had filed formal complaints about her behavior. She'd been bullying younger workers, particularly the women she perceived as threats, making their lives miserable with constant criticism and impossible demands. The details Maxwell shared painted a picture of someone I barely recognized, even knowing how cruel Giselle could be. She'd used her relationship with him as a weapon, telling coworkers, she'd get them fired if they didn't do her work for her, or if they refused to cover for her frequent absences. She'd taken credit for other people's sales, stolen commissions, and created a toxic environment in a department that had previously functioned smoothly. 3 separate employees had filed formal documentation with Human Resources, and the company had been building a case against her when the credential fraud came to light. Maxwell said that normally he wouldn't be involved in employee terminations at that level, but given their personal relationship, had decided to handle this directly and privately, rather than having security escort her out of a retail location in front of customers. Giselle exploded. She started screaming that he couldn't fire her, that they were together, that this was illegal somehow. Maxwell's expression didn't change as he corrected her again. They were together, past tense, because he was ending their relationship that night as well. He said he'd been planning to break up with her for weeks, but had been trying to find the right time and approach. Tonight's display of cruelty toward her own sister had simply confirmed he was making the right decision. The careful control in his voice was somehow more devastating than if he'd yelled. He was calm, factual, unmoved by her rising hysteria. Then Maxwell started revealing the full extent of Giselle's deception in their relationship, and even I was shocked by some of what came out. Shed used his credit cards without permission over the past 2 months, racking up charges totaling over $40,000 on shopping sprees, spa days, and expensive gifts for her friends. When Head confronted her about it 2 weeks earlier, Shed claimed she didn't understand how credit card limits worked, that Shed thought he wanted her to use them. Head found her going through his private documents in his home office, including confidential business files and personal financial records. When caught, Shed made excuses about looking for a pen. Most disturbingly, Shed told his mother that they were engaged and had started planning a wedding, something they'd never discussed, forcing Maxwell into an awkward conversation with his family to clarify that no engagement existed. My mother tried desperately to intervene, to defend Giselle and smooth everything over. Diane stood up and addressed Maxwell with her most charming smile, calling this all a misunderstanding, insisting that Giselle would never do the things he was describing. Maxwell turned to my mother with a patience that was clearly wearing thin and said that he had documentation of everything, that he didn't make accusations without evidence. He pulled out his phone and showed her screenshots of Giselle's Instagram stories, the carefully curated lies about her life. Most of the designer gifts Giselle had showed off online were rented from luxury rental services or borrowed from friends for photo opportunities. The Paris trip Shed bragged about for weeks? Shed actually gone to Paris, Oregon for a single afternoon and used photo editing to make it look like she was in France. My father spoke up for the first time all evening, his voice quiet but heavy with disappointment. He looked at Giselle and asked what Shed done, why Shed destroyed her life like this. My mother tried to shush him, to get him to support Giselle unconditionally the way she always had, but for once Arthur didn't back down. The room felt like it was crackling with tension, everyone afraid to move or speak. Giselle, cornered and desperate, did what she always did when backed into a corner. She went on the attack, and she aimed that attack directly at me. She screamed that this was all my fault, that I'd sabotaged her, that I must have seduced Maxwell to get revenge for childhood grievances. She called me pathetic, jealous, manipulative. Maxwell cut her off sharply. He stated clearly that I had been nothing but professional in every interaction, that I'd actually hesitated to work with TechVance because I was worried about creating problems between Giselle and him. He said that, unlike Giselle, I had integrity, something that was clearly foreign to her. Giselle tried several more desperate tactics. She threatened to claim sexual harassment, until Vincent quietly mentioned that had been present or aware of all the business interactions between Maxwell and me, that everything had been documented and appropriate. She tried to claim I'd stolen business ideas from her, which would have been laughable if it weren't so pathetic, since Giselle knew nothing about design or sustainability. My portfolio was dated, copyrighted, and verifiably my original work. Finally, she turned to our mother, begging her to cause a scene, to defend her, to do something. But even Diane seemed to realize that Giselle had finally gone too far. My mother's face showed a flicker of uncertainty. Maybe the first time in decades Shed questioned whether her golden child was actually made of gold or just cheap paint that was finally flaking off. She didn't leap to Giselle's defense with her usual fervor. She just stood there looking lost and confused, her worldview crumbling around her. Giselle grabbed her designer purse from the side table, the same purse Shed showed off online just yesterday. Maxwell mentioned almost casually that the purse was a fake, a knockoff Shed bought in a tourist shop and claimed was authentic Prada. Even her accessories were lies. Giselle stormed toward the door of the penthouse, her heels clicking violently against the hardwood floors. She turned back at the threshold for one final dramatic moment, pointing at all of us and screaming that we'd regret this, that Shed make us all pay, that we hadn't heard the last of her. Maxwell informed her calmly that 2 security guards were waiting in the hallway to escort her out of the building. That Head called them 20 minutes earlier. The implication was clear. Maxwell had known exactly how this evening would unfold. Had planned it, prepared for it, and executed it flawlessly. Giselle's face crumpled when she realized she couldn't even leave with dignity. She yanked open the door to find two professional security officers standing there politely, and they accompanied her to the elevator while the rest of us stood in Maxwell's penthouse, listening to the sound of her angry sobbing fade away. My mother moved to follow Giselle, probably intending to chase after her and provide comfort, but my father caught her arm and stopped her. It was such an unprecedented action that everyone froze. Arthur looked at his wife and said, more firmly than I'd ever heard him speak to her, to let Giselle go and face the consequences of her actions for once. Diane turned on me instead, her face twisted with anger, and demanded to know if I was happy now, if I was satisfied with having ruined my sister's life. The accusation was so familiar, so predictable, that I almost laughed. I met my mother's eyes and said quietly that I hadn't done anything. That Giselle had destroyed her own life with lies and cruelty, that I was simply trying to build something honest and real. Maxwell stepped forward and addressed my mother directly. He told her that I was incredibly talented, that the work I'd done was superior to designs from agencies his company paid 6 figures annually to retain. He said that instead of spending years tearing me down, she should be proud of the daughter who'd overcome every obstacle and built something meaningful through sheer determination and skill. Vincent nodded in agreement, adding that the proposal I'd submitted showed more innovation and practical thinking than most of the professional presentations he saw from established firms. Margot, who'd been quietly observing everything, spoke up to say that I'd handled the entire evening with more grace than anyone should have to demonstrate, that my composure in the face of deliberate cruelty was remarkable. My mother's face showed something I'd rarely seen before, a flicker of doubt, of recognition that maybe she'd been wrong about which daughter deserved her pride. But decades of favoritism and prejudice don't dissolve in a single moment. She couldn't bring herself to apologize or admit fault. Instead, she just stood there looking smaller than usual, diminished. My father finally found his voice and spoke words I'd waited 31 years to hear. He looked at me directly and said he was sorry, that he should have stopped the unfair treatment years ago, that had failed me as a father by choosing peace over protection. It wasn't enough to heal all the wounds, but it was a start, the first time Head acknowledged the truth of our family dynamics out loud. The silence that followed was awkward and heavy. My parents gathered their coats and left shortly after, my mother unable to meet anyone's eyes, my father giving my shoulder a brief squeeze as he passed. Vincent broke the uncomfortable quiet by deliberately changing the subject to business, asking me thoughtful questions about my design process and my vision for the future of sustainable packaging. His wife Margot joined the conversation, and slowly the atmosphere shifted from tense to professional. I found myself relaxing slightly, discussing industry trends and material innovations with people who actually understood and valued what I was trying to accomplish. Maxwell watched me with an expression of respect, letting me shine without trying to take over the conversation. After Vincent and Margot left, thanking Maxwell for dinner and congratulating me on the contract, I found myself alone with Maxwell in his penthouse. The chef had cleaned up and departed. The city lights sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Maxwell brought out the actual contract Head mentioned earlier and spread it across his dining table. He assured me he hadn't been bluffing, that this was a real offer with real terms. We went through the contract together, 3 years of partnership with TechVance, quarterly payments that would total $750,000 over the life of the agreement, creative control over the designs, and profit sharing if the packaging redesign increased sales beyond projected targets. Margot had slipped me her business card before leaving and offered to review the contract from a legal perspective if I wanted a second opinion, which spoke volumes about the kind of person she was. My hands shook as I signed the contract, barely believing this was real, that my struggling business had just received the lifeline it desperately needed. Maxwell signed as well, and just like that, everything changed. I asked him the question that had been burning in my mind all evening. Why had he really done this? Why had he offered me the contract? Why had he ended things with Giselle so publicly? Why had he involved himself in our family drama? Maxwell was quiet for a moment, then said that my work was excellent and that was the only reason that mattered professionally. But he admitted he'd seen how Giselle treated me, how she seemed to take pleasure in making me feel small. He said he'd watched people get bullied throughout his career, had seen talented individuals destroyed by those who felt threatened by their abilities, and had made a decision long ago not to tolerate it in business or in his personal life. 2 weeks after that Christmas dinner that changed everything, I sat in my small office space looking at numbers I'd once only dreamed about. The first payment from TechVance had cleared, deposited into my business account in an amount that made me check 3 times to confirm it was real. It immediately hired 2 employees, talented designers I'd known from my corporate days who'd been looking for opportunities to do meaningful work. We were moving to a larger office space the following month, one with actual conference rooms and natural light, and room for the equipment we'd need to prototype new designs. My phone kept ringing with potential clients who'd somehow heard about the TechVance contract and wanted to discuss their own packaging needs. Giselle's downfall had been spectacular and very public. Within 48 hours of Christmas dinner, all her social media accounts had been deleted. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved back in with our parents, working at a different retail store across town, trying to rebuild from nothing. She was apparently spreading rumors that I'd slept my way to success, that I'd stolen Maxwell from her through seduction and manipulation. But too many people had witnessed the truth, and her lies found no traction. Vincent and Margot had been guests at the dinner, had seen everything, and they weren't shy about correcting the record when Giselle's version of events reached their social circles. My mother's transformation was slow and incomplete, but it was happening. 3 weeks after Christmas, Diane called me one evening. She didn't apologize, couldn't quite bring herself to admit she'd been wrong for 3 decades, but she asked how my business was doing. It was the first time in my entire life that she'd shown genuine interest in my work, in my success, in anything about my life that didn't involve comparing me unfavorably to Giselle. The conversation was stilted and awkward, filled with long pauses and careful words, but it was something, a tiny crack in the wall she'd built between us. I didn't expect her to suddenly become the mother I'd always wanted, but maybe over time we could find some kind of relationship that wasn't built entirely on disappointment. My father's redemption was more sincere and more complete. Arthur asked to meet me for coffee one Saturday morning in January, and when we sat down across from each other, he offered a full apology. He said he'd enabled my mother's favoritism for years, that he'd thought staying quiet and keeping peace was the right approach. But all he'd really done was hurt me while claiming to protect the family. He asked if he could invest in my business, and he pulled out a check for $5,000. It wasn't a huge amount, not compared to the TechVance contract, but it was symbolic. It was my father finally choosing to support me, to believe in me, to put his money and his faith behind my dreams. I accepted the investment and gave him 10% equity in the company, making him a real partner. The TechVance project launched in February with a press release and industry coverage. My sustainable packaging designs were featured in several trade magazines, and suddenly I was getting interview requests from publications I'd only dreamed of being mentioned in. Other companies started reaching out, tech firms and food companies and consumer goods manufacturers, all wanting to discuss how they could make their packaging more environmentally friendly. My business grew faster than I could have planned for, and I found myself working harder than ever before, but it was joyful work, fulfilling work, work that mattered. I started seeing a therapist in March, finally addressing the years of family trauma and emotional abuse I'd normalized for so long. I learned about setting boundaries, about recognizing that I didn't need my mother's approval to be worthy, about understanding that Giselle's cruelty came from her own emptiness rather than from any actual failing on my part. The therapy sessions were difficult, often leaving me emotionally exhausted, but they were necessary. I was learning to separate my self-worth from my family's assessment of me, learning to build a life on my own terms, without constantly seeking validation from people who'd never been capable of giving it. Maxwell and I developed an unexpected friendship that was strictly professional but genuinely warm. He became a mentor, teaching me about scaling a business, about negotiating with corporate clients, about building a team and managing growth. He introduced me to contacts in the industry, opened doors I wouldn't have known existed. He started dating someone new in late January. A biochemist Head met at a tech conference, and he told me Head learned to look for substance instead of flash, for genuine compatibility instead of surface attraction. I met her once at a TechVance event and liked her immediately. She was smart, kind, unpretentious, everything Giselle had never been. 3 months after that Christmas dinner, Giselle showed up at my new office unannounced. My assistant tried to stop her, but Giselle pushed past and barged into my office where I was reviewing designs with my team. She didn't come to apologize or make amends. She came to demand money. She actually said I owed her, that I'd stolen her success, that if she hadn't introduced me to Maxwell, none of this would have happened. I looked at my sister. This woman I'd spent my entire life trying to please and impress, and I felt nothing but pity. I told her calmly and clearly that she hadn't introduced us, that Maxwell and I had met independently, and that even if her version were true, I didn't owe her anything. I told her not to contact me again unless she was ready to take responsibility for her actions and genuinely apologize for years of cruelty. Giselle left my office screaming threats, and I had to hire security for the building after that. But I felt empowered rather than victimized. For the first time in my life, I'd set a firm boundary with my sister and enforced it without guilt or apology. I'd recognized that her problems were her own to solve, that I wasn't responsible for fixing her life or absorbing her attacks. The true victory wasn't the contract or the money, though those were wonderful. The real win was my ability to stand up for myself, to recognize my own worth, to walk away from toxic people without feeling like I'd failed somehow. My family dynamics continued to shift slowly over the following months. My parents started to see Giselle's patterns repeating themselves. She found a new boyfriend in April, someone with money, and immediately the social media posts started again with borrowed luxury and exaggerated achievements. She was caught in lies within weeks, and this time even my mother couldn't ignore the evidence. Diane started to understand what Shed enabled all those years. How Shed created a daughter who had no authentic self, only a collection of masks and manipulations. By Thanksgiving of the following year, my mother asked if I would host the family dinner. It was a small thing, but symbolic. An acknowledgement that I was the stable one, the successful one, the daughter they could actually rely on. I spent a lot of time reflecting on my journey from that humiliating Christmas dinner to where I stood now. The humiliation had been real and painful, but it had also been a catalyst. It had forced everything into the open, had stripped away pretense and revealed truth. I'd been building toward this moment for years with every struggle, every time I'd gotten back up after being knocked down, every choice I'd made to pursue my dreams despite everyone telling me I was foolish. The business success was gratifying, but the personal growth was what really mattered. I'd learned that I didn't need to prove anything to the people who'd spent years making me feel worthless. I thought about my younger self, the girl who'd believed her mother's narrative that she was plain and unremarkable and would never amount to much. I wished I could go back and tell her that she was so much more than the limited vision others had for her. I stood at my office window on a spring evening, watching the sun set over the city, and looked at everything I'd built. My thriving business with a talented team, my growing client list, my healthier relationship with my father, my freedom from seeking approval I'd never receive. The people who'd tried to diminish me had become irrelevant to my happiness, and that felt like the ultimate success. My sister had wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone to prove she was superior, to cement her position as the golden child who could do no wrong. Instead, Shed revealed her own emptiness, her own desperate need for external validation because she had nothing real inside. I'd learned through years of pain that true success isn't about proving others wrong or making them see your value. It's about proving yourself right, about building a life so full and authentic that the opinions of people who never believed in you simply don't matter anymore. That Christmas dinner didn't ruin my life like Giselle had planned. It freed me to finally live the life I'd been working toward. unburdened by the need to please people who were never going to be pleased. So, let me ask you something. Have you ever had a moment where someone's attempt to destroy you actually became the catalyst for your greatest success? Drop a comment and share your story because I'd love to hear how you turned your pain into power. If this story resonated with you, if you felt the sting of family betrayal or the weight of never being good enough, please hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more stories about people who rose above the toxicity and built beautiful lives despite everything. And share this video with someone who needs to hear that their worth isn't determined by people who can't see it. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it reminds you that you're stronger than you know, that the people who try to tear you down are usually struggling with their own emptiness, and that your success is the best response to anyone who doubted you. Wishing you all the courage to set boundaries, the strength to walk away from toxicity, and the vision to build the life you truly deserve.